Support for today's show comes from Career Fitter. Career Fitter is a site where they give you a 60-question test. Takes about 10 minutes. And out of that, they're going to give you recommendations basically for your ideal business environment, a team building approach, career matches, work strengths, income potential based upon job matching, preferred communications methods, weaknesses that you may have, a whole host of things. They'll give you a free report. They have a premium report as well. Quality service recommended by Forbes, Psychology Today, and quite a few others. So use the link in the show notes. It will help you start to figure out some of the things you might consider with a new career. And if you hire me to coach you, I'll give you a little bit of a discount and reimburse you for some of the cost of the premium report, because it'll help us both with coaching. And now, let's get going. This is No BS Job Search Advice Radio, episode 2126. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and welcome to Wednesday and a longer interview. But I did something different this week. It's an experiment. Instead of one 30-minute interview, I decided to break it into a part 1 and part 2. And this interview is with Lisa Rangel. I did it a few weeks ago. And she had some really good advice about shifting your mindset. Because so often in job search and in life in general, we get stinkin thinkin is the way I refer to it. A phrase that Zig Ziglar, one of the great sales trainers in the United States, coined what seems like 100 years ago. But Lisa talks about a lot of real situations where people can shift their mindset by doing some very simple things. Hope you find this helpful. Hope you give the show an honest review wherever you listen to it, and we'll be back in just one moment. Today's show is brought to you by FlexJobs. At FlexJobs, you can find flexible work at home, real jobs available in a host of different fields that you can apply for. Now, to get access to the application, you have to create an account, but it has jobs in HR, recruiting, graphic design, bilingual positions, sales. There's lots of different categories of positions that are available. So use the link in the show notes, go to FlexJobs, and see what they have for you for flexible work. And with that, we'll be back in just one moment. So my guest today is the one, the only, Lisa Rangel, who's the president and CEO of Chameleon Resumes. Chameleon is the only executive resume writing, LinkedIn profile development, and job search consultancy hired by LinkedIn for 8 years to help premium members win interviews faster and negotiate the maximum compensation. Lisa, welcome.
I'm so happy to be here, Jeff. Thank you so much for asking me.
You're very welcome. Love to see a smile on your face.
Always, always.
Good. So folks, we're going to be talking about shifting your mindset, because most of you have a case of what Zig Ziglar used to call stinkin thinkin. You make rules that don't serve you. So it creates the question to start off, why do people struggle so much with this kind of stuff?
It's obviously been a rough year, and people struggling. The reasons could be, numerous, many valid, and even if it's, not a big reason in some people's minds, it's still valid in their minds, right? So, it's been a rough year, but I find that a common theme for those who've been successful in landing jobs during this, tumultuous period is that they tend to, not that they have nothing negative going on in their lives, but they tend to really zero in on the moment that they're sitting at their computer or they're on a phone call or on a Zoom call, and they just try to make the best of the moment that they're in. So they'll send the most positive pointed email that they can, or they'll, send a positive vibe on a Zoom call. Like, they'll just not necessarily think about everything else going on in their life or the world, but they will zero in and try to be mindful of the moment they're in and make the best of it. And I find that that's a common theme in the clients that we're working with that have success, is that they're just focused on what's working and what's in front of them.
It's funny, it reminds me from social work school, which I have an MSW. They used to call that partializing. You zero in on the one thing that's right in front of you and kind of push the other things aside for a period of time so that you provide best performance right then and there.
Because it's funny you bring that reference to social work, because I come from a sales background and recruiting and sales background, and I called it, what's closest to the money, focus on what's closest to the money. You don't get wrapped up in all the things that you can do that sidetrack you and get you off your game. And it was like, what's the one activity that's the closest to the money? And in job searching, it's what's the activity that's going to get you closer to landing the job. Some days that's starting over and reaching out to somebody that you haven't talked to in a while. Sometimes that's preparing for the interview that you have right in front of you. So it's just, I think if the concept is similar that you're mentioning, it's just interesting to hear that from the social work standpoint, because I hadn't heard that before, because that's not my background. But, I think we're all basically kind of peddling the same stuff. It's really just staying focused on what you can do and doing your best to compartmentalize what you can't help in the moment, just so you can move forward with what you can do.
And, this obviously existed pre-COVID, and folks were recording this in March 2021. So,
right.
When Lisa's referencing, tough year, that's the COVID year, obviously. But
right.
She and I both have been around the block a couple of times in recruiting. And as a result, we both know that this existed way before that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it just became, compounded in COVID, that it's something that we needed to do to try to still move forward, even if it's slowly, even if it's 3 steps forward and 2.5 back, you still got to move forward, or at least do the best you can to move forward. And, I find that if you can, a lot, whether you're meditating, officially, or just taking moments to breathe, or not packing your day with, 50 things to do when you have control over that, just anything you can do to just take a moment to appreciate the moment that, you have a roof over your head, you have, your health, hopefully that day, and, and then just doing the activity that is in front of you and leaving the results up to the universe to bring to you what it's supposed to bring to you. I think, it sounds a little woo-woo, and I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I find that just, when you do what's in front of you the best you can, the universe will provide and not drop you.
That one's such a tough one for people to hear.
Yeah.
Because, especially in U.S. culture, of course, we're action-oriented. We want to take control. We got to do stuff, because otherwise we look lazy. Our wife, husband, or partner will say, okay, what are you doing today? I need you out of the house as fast as possible.
And I'm a recovering, busyaholic by far. Like, I mean, and I say recovering because I fall into it now and again and have to get myself out of it. But it's, and I think compounded with that is the expectation, managing expectations, I think, is another huge one. And I think if, I had a conversation, it just reminds me of a conversation I had with someone recently who was really struggling because she felt the interviews weren't going well. So, she felt downtrodden to go reach out and get more, right? Because if it's not going well, you don't want to do more of it, right? Especially during a time where you're already not feeling so good to begin with. So, we had to reframe what her expectations of the interview were, to, it's like, okay, have some compassion for the person on the other side of the Zoom screen. Maybe that recruiter or that hiring manager is also having a bad day. And yes, they have a job and you don't, but that doesn't mean they're not having a bad day either, right? So maybe your expectation for the interview is to really just make a human connection versus land a job, which I know sounds really strange when you're a job seeker, but is that if you're constantly being let down by an interview not going as perfectly as it should, or that the person on the other side of the screen not being as prepared as they should be, maybe you just need to make a human connection that day. And that's what's going to be the expectation. Lower your expectations without lowering your standards. And it might actually make the conversation more fluid, and you're not going to walk away disappointed. And that will just help with your mental health to then feel good about the interview, feel good about the conversation, where you're going to then want to, once that conversation's over, go back to your list, go back to your LinkedIn connections and start reaching out to new people to make new conversations. So instead of saying, I'm going to go set up interviews, maybe lower the expectations and say, I'm going to set up conversations, and just have conversations and see where they go. You're always going to be prepared for a big interview if it comes, right? Or if that's the nature of where that conversation goes. But I said, maybe you need to start preparing for the smaller, lower level expectation type conversations as well. So this way more meaningful things can happen.
When I talk to people about interviewing, because that's my specialty, is prepping people for interviews. I talk with them about competence is only one variable someone looks for. And there you can execute. If it's on your resume, be prepared to talk about it, obviously. But they also look for self-confidence, character, chemistry, maybe a little bit of charisma, because in many roles, charismatic people are going to get hired over the non-charismatics. But to me, the final thing that someone looks for when they hire is they want to feel like they trust the person.
Agreed.
And that's really about the connection. It's about the relationship you can formulate with that other person where they can look across at you and go, yeah, I don't have to worry about her.
Right, and feel the comfort. I mean, I often use an analogy of, even though the person on the interview is the guest, right, the candidate, I say, try to treat the interview as if you were inviting someone into your living room. Like you would try to make their life comfortable. You would try to make their life easier. You would, want to make sure they had what they needed. I said, if you go into an interview, even as the guest with that mindset, I said, you're going to make someone feel better. And I feel like most hires happen because the hiring manager feels like that person's going to make their life easier. Nobody's getting hired because they're going to make their life harder, right? So, however that needs to be conveyed, right? Whether it's fixing a challenge they're having or helping them capitalize on an opportunity they have before them, whatever the situation is specifically, the end goal should be, how do I convey to this person that I'm going to make their life easier? And and so part of that is I think softening the expectations around a conversation so you can listen more, come across more at ease, come across more like a business partner evaluating a situation and not, a candidate, being, evaluated by a hiring manager, which has this subserviency kind of vibe to it, right? I said, so just maybe take it down a notch in terms of the expectation. And I mean, that in itself is a mindset shift too, right? Because now you're going into this as a meeting of two equals versus, the hiring manager and the candidate being evaluated. So much of this is the success comes from, I think, reframing things, lowering expectations in some ways, easing up on things in other ways, and just approaching people like humans. I mean, we've all been through a lot, some more than others, but generally speaking, relatively speaking, it's all a lot for each of us, right? And I think if we can come to the table with some more, even more compassion than before, it tends to pay off, right? I mean, nothing's absolute, nothing's 100%, but
it does. It does.
That's my take on it.
And I also think about, since we're talking about shifting mindsets, and you raised the scenario earlier, I don't want to let go away. The depressed individual who's just gotten slammed in some way.
Yeah.
And they thought they did well. And then they get the feedback that basically says you stank up the joint. That's the way they hear it.
That's the way they hear it, right?
Yeah. And how do you help someone? I know you explained how you did in this particular case, but if you were giving someone else a formula for, I'm really in the dumps. I am awful. Oh, woe is me. I'll never get a job.
Right. No, I mean, when someone, like you said, hears that they stank up the joint, I love that your analogy. I'll just try to break it down with them, and say, did they actually tell you that? Or are you filling in that blank? So, I really try to tell someone, in absence of information, don't fill in the blanks. And if you're going to fill in the blanks intuitively or instinctively, certainly don't fill it in with false negative information, right? So until someone tells you, get the hell out of here, we don't want you, right? It's not a no. It may be a frustrating, not yet, it may be a frustrating unanswered scenario, but that doesn't mean no. And it certainly doesn't mean no because you're terrible. So in absence of information, don't fill in the blanks. And, I think that we have to treat ourselves the way we would treat others. We often, all of us have an advisory component to us in some capacity. I think most of us do, whether we're officially a coach or not. And we have friends or family that come to us for advice. And how would we talk to them, right? So I'll remind the person having that, doom and gloom moment or period, say what you're telling yourself, would you tell your best friend who came to you with the same scenario, or your adult child?
I wouldn't do
Right.
that. No.
Or your adult child, or, your coworker. Of course not. So just easier said than done. I know that, and I say that as someone who, some days doesn't want to get up out of bed, right? And who some days feels like the weight of the world and I can't fix it. And so I empathize as much as I can, right? But I think we just gotta zero in on what is the task in front of us. And if the task in front of us is to send an email to a hiring manager, then that's the task in front of us today. And if that's the only thing somebody who is really down in the dumps gets done that day, that's a victory.
That's going to be the end of part 1. Part 2 is going to be tomorrow. And as you can hear, Lisa had some great advice in the course of this conversation. So come back tomorrow. There's going to be more. So that's today's show. I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, I've got a lot that's in the show notes that will help you. Go there, take a look at some of the things I highlight. I know it can help you with your search. But I want you to do one thing for me, and that is put in your phone thebiggamehunter.us, Jeff Altman, my name. And when you need help, when you need advice, when you have a question, come over to the website, go exploring in the blog, contact me for coaching or because you have a question. I'd love to help you. In the meantime, I hope you have a terrific day, and most importantly, be great! If you're going to start a business for yourself, a side hustle or an actual all-out business, it's important that you set yourself up the correct way for tax purposes. Incorporate.com, great service. I used it myself to start my business many years ago. It will allow you to set up a C Corp, an S Corp, an LLC, or a nonprofit all through the web. They'll answer questions for you. They're not legal experts. You should have one of your own, but they make the process of setting up a business very easy. So use the link in the show notes to go to incorporate.com. It will help you a lot. And we'll be back in just one moment.